live, you guys can skip right ahead to about 2.5, 3 minutes to see the live show. So, Coach Swingle, what's going on?
What's up? How's it going?
How we doing? Enjoying your vacation?
Yeah, a little mini one I'm going back home to Cleveland tomorrow, but it was nice to visit the fam for a few days while they're out here. But
yeah, it's good you could join us, especially find a computer, find a connection, and talk a little bit of football.
Yeah, you obviously know I've been traveling a little bit the past couple of times we've done this. I was in New York and all that kind of stuff. But as far as I was obviously we had the connection earlier, but I was a little leery of the Wi-Fi here, but thankfully it did work out. So we're all good.
Good. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about run blocking technique, talking about attack points and the gap scheme, inside zone scheme, a little bit of split zone as well. The presentation itself is going to be relatively short, but the content itself is going to be pretty packed as far as hand placement, feet, the whole 9 yards. So we're going to let the room fill up a little bit. We're going to get started in just about 45, 50 seconds as we let the room fill up and we start to get all the message out to everybody. So I'm going to get going in just a minute here. Saw Odell make a nice catch over the middle today. I don't know if you saw that. It was circulating on Twitter.
Yeah, his vertical and then had that like box out move with his outside elbow and kind of had it was like a subtle push off. So it wasn't like necessarily a full on like push off, but he definitely had some nice leverage to get that separation. And he had that tight on the backside, so I had like a nice box out for the defender so he couldn't get back over the top. It was a nice little play. And
your long lost twin, Baker Mayfield, is throwing the ball nicely there. So
flinging it around, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm no longer at those practices, but always good to see the old squad.
Sure.
Do it well.
All right, Coach Swingle, if you're good, we're gonna get going here.
Always ready.
Yes. All right. Perfect. So before we kick off, we're going to give a big shout to our sponsor, Team Builder, who provides strength and conditioning software to more than 500 high school football programs nationwide, as well as the NFL. If you guys write your own programs, have a full-time strength coach, or if you need training programs, Team Builder can help. Give those guys a shout over at Team Builder. Use the promo code VIQtory. And right now they're offering a 10-week spread offense tempo training program. And when you use code VIQtory, you'll get a 14-day free trial for that. So check it out, Team Builder, promo code VIQtory, vIQtory. All right, Coach, let's get going here. I'm going to share my screen. And as mentioned today, we're going to be talking about run blocking techniques. And like I said, it's relatively short. As you can see here, it's only 4 slides, but we're going to be talking in depth with these 4 slides that we have going on here. So, all righty. Who's that? All right, let me adjust this screen a little bit so everyone can see it, and we're gonna get going. All righty, so inside zone. So, Coach, go ahead and take us off here. Talk a little bit about inside zone, play side gap, play side combo, and backside cutoff, and just the techniques that go into it.
So with inside zone, obviously a wide variety of different ways that teams do prefer to run their specific format of inside zone as far as the concept wise, but the technique for most of those teams are going to be fairly similar across the board. So as far as the place, the tackle against even fronts is most likely going to be man on the defensive end. Inside zone seems more of a hybrid zone man scheme where it has its own principles, but more of a man concept with the underlying values of the play. So that play side tackle is going to be man on that defensive end, the play side defensive end. And he's going to be taking a wrong step, which is an inside step away from the zone call to secure that inside B gap to make sure that defensive end can't get back over the top across his face. And then that second step is going to be through his midline, or a lot of coaching cues are through his crotch. And he's going to strike with his hands and elbows tight to his ribs to engage lats, thumbs, and pinkies up and out. That's the inside pressure cue that's listed there. A strong, violent strike to kind of displace that defensive end is key with that. And then driving his feet with his duck walk demeanor to finish the block on that. But the big coaching point on that is the wrong step too vertical through the midline to avoid the defensive end climbing back over at the top and making sure that B gap is secured so we can hit the running play from the backside A gap to the play side B gap. A couple months ago now, I want to say it was, we talked about tight zone. That's more of an A gap to A gap. A lot of teams will run with their inside zone hitting from the backside A gap to the play side B gap. So it's important to really make sure that we get that B gap secured with the play side tackle. And then if the play side guard, the same rules apply. If there's a 3 technique or a guy in a 4-eye and an odd front, any sort of a play side covered gap, we're going to have that same wrong step to basically avoid having a defender reach back over the top and get into the A gap. Moving on to the play side combo. This is for a closed A gap for the most part between the play side guard and the center. If a team wants it to hit that B gap, so you'll see here Baylor. We have some clips from Baylor that we're going to show after we go through this slide. Theirs is an A gap to A gap, so they don't have the timing set, but some teams that do want to have that play hit a little bit wider, if there's a closed A gap, the play side guard, which is the front side blocker, will use a timing step outside and then step vertically through the midline on the backside to get vertical through his crotch, similar to the ending point of the wrong step for the play side covered assignment. And then the center, which is the backside player, is also going to get immediately vertical through that midline, attempting to get hip to hip, keeping the outside hand free, so that way with the hip square, they're able to come off onto a backer. This is because if you have both hands engaged, it's a lot harder and your hips will be turned. So when a backer comes to either side, either player can get off onto that backer to get to the second level and secure the play side linebacker.
Yeah, and I want to stop you there right there, Ryan. So when we talk about getting hip to hip, talk a little bit about the actual technique of getting hip to hip and how you would practice that. Are you using a sled to practice those steps to get hip to hip together, or like what do you recommend for a coach who's maybe just starting out with some sort of inside zone or any zone technique when they're trying to? And I know you have here throw them out the club, right? What is the proper technique to get hip to hip, and what would you recommend to practice?
Yeah, so I think before you go into, if you're just starting off teaching this to players, I think it's important to progress from not going full speed to going to maybe like a half line scenario. So when you start off going to a half speed or in a skill acquisition drill, using either, like you said, a sled or a handbag to get that vertical step through the crotch will most likely is the aiming point for both players. So by doing that, if they can both get vertical and have that step going to the same point, in turn that will bring them hip to hip. So with either a bag, preferably I prefer a bag of some sort, that way that there is still that human element to it where you have that same landmark for the initial step. I think that is the best way that I would recommend working that as far as an introductory phase, and then going into either a half line drill, then going into a team period where you would run it full go.
Exactly. And everything that you want to do, you want to teach in progression and make sure that, especially from the offensive line standpoint too, everything needs to be in unison, right? And if you have that small crease where a lineman's able to slip through, that's how you split the double team. And I think it was like a week ago where I tweeted that guy that split the double team. He did it perfectly from a defensive line standpoint. Defensive coaches were loving it, but it got a lot of blowback from the offensive coaches because you had a weak double team where they both stepped and he let him split the crack of it. And that's essentially what you want to do from a defensive standpoint. So when we talk about getting hip to hip and getting that comfort of, and I know this is going to sound silly, but you don't want to step on the other person's toes, right? And that's where a lot of teams that practice inside zone from a new coaching perspective, they step and then they're stepping on each other's feet, or they're leaving the gap too big. And that's where you allow that defensive lineman to slip that double team and by getting skinny through the hole. So you really got to make sure those steps are essentially inches apart from each other as you're driving up and trying to double him and throw him out the club.
Right. And I think that's a good point too, just working that progression, like I said, from the back drill to a half line where you can just solely focus on that half line as opposed to going full line where you have 5 different guys going at once and you see different stunts and different things like that. So it's good to, like you said, get lots of repetition. Obviously, the only way that we get better is through repetition. And by working different phases of the run game is a good way to do that. And that last coaching cue, that throw him out the club, that's a good one from Chip Kelly that I read about actually the other day. I just had a refresher on that from his an inside zone clinic that I was watching of his. Talked about inside zone and wide zone, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But inside zone isn't a finesse play like wide zone is. It's one of those where that play side combo needs to get a vertical presence, and basically you want to put that defender, that first level defender, in the second level defender's lap. That's when you want to come off. It's not we're going to get 3 steps in the ground and then have one guy come off and chase a linebacker. You want to come off as late as possible and get as much vertical movement as possible to pry open that A gap and get push up to the second level.
Talk about the overall theory of inside zone. Is it to displace defenders vertically? You want to displace them horizontally? What are you looking for as a coach when you're teaching the inside zone, how to displace the defense lineman?
Different teams do it differently, but the way that I've always done it for that play, especially that play side combo, which we've been talking about right now, the one combination block that you're going to have, and the whole point of inside zone as opposed to wide zone, which we'll talk about more in the next slide, is making sure that there are double teams created, and that double team needs to be a violent vertical presence. And that's really the basis of inside zone. The other, like the next point we'll talk about is that backside cutoff, and that backside cutoff is more of a finesse wide zone technique, whereas the play combo was violent, get him out the club, get as much vertical movement as possible, and then those 2 play side covered. If you have 2 play side covered linemen, those are more of just trying to keep them out of the A gap. You do want to get some vertical push, but really that combo block is going to be the one that is going to be that vertical presence.
Awesome. Okay, talk a little bit about the backside cutoff. I know I cut you off there after the play side combo.
Yeah, so the backside cutoff for teams that are going to be reading that backside defensive end for a zone read look, or just trying to get good box numbers and hoping that backside end doesn't crash on the line. Different teams do different ways. But if they do have a backside cutoff, as opposed to using that same technique with the wrong step to vertical through the midline, it's going to be a drive reach is the term that I like to use for it. So it's going to attempt to get to that played side number, but at the end of the day, it's more looking to fight pressure against the defensive lineman. And if you can't get to that play side number, looking to wash him down the line to create a cutback lane to the B gap. And we'll talk more about the technique in the wide zone, because the drive reach is the rule basically for every single offensive lineman. So I don't really want to get too much into that until we get to the next slide as far as the technique wise. But it's essentially, it is a reach where you're trying to get to the play side number and cut him off. But if you can't, then you just want to wash him down the line to create that cutback lane.
Got it. All right, let's dig into some film here.
Perfect.
Okay.
So I'm not able to see the presentation currently.
Okay. It's not okay. So let's see. Sharing. Okay, we're looking at the first clip on the wrong step with the inside leverage here.
Right. So on this, it's going to be that wrong step for the play side tackle and the 2 backside guys. Like I said, Baylor runs it a little differently, so they're not going to be reading that backside defensive end. So the 2 backside players are going to be wrong stepping to the backside 3 technique and the wide defensive end, as well as that play side guy. The play side guy doesn't do a good enough job, and that guy gets across his face, but the running back's able to make a guy miss. But essentially, that is what you want to do, is a good example of the backside guard and the backside tackle of getting that wrong step to secure the inside leverage against the defender.
Yep. Now I'm going to slow it down here just a little bit for the people watching here.
And then once we get to that next clip, it'll be of that play side combination. It's not an inside zone play, but it's a good example of that play side combination with future Hall of Famer if he's not already. I'm not sure if he is. Olin Kreutz, center for the Bears, a good example of getting that vertical presence up to the play side linebacker, of throwing him out the club, getting hip to hip, stepping through the midline, and getting a nice vertical presence.
Yeah, I actually have it right here. Okay.
So yeah, getting hip to hip is big on that, and just that violent nature of that combination block for the play side combo is what you're looking for there. And Hall of Famer Olin Kreutz is a great example of how to play with controlled violence.
Yep. Controlled violence, I like that. Yeah, because this clip here, I mean, they're
right.
It looks like poetry in motion right there, right? They're both stepping together. They're both
absolutely, and that violent after the come off by the play side guard, just that violent, nasty nature is what is a great teach tape for inside zone on the combination block.
Yep. Great low pad level, getting through them, getting to the next level. Perfect.
Absolutely.
All right, so we'll get to the next slide here. So now we have talk a little bit about wide zone.
All right, so for wide zone, it's going to be, there's no run rules like there is for inside zone, as far as if your play side have a covered gap, you're going to be taking the guy, and for the backside gap, you're going to be having a backside cutoff. This one, everyone's going to be drive reaching if you're covered. If not, if there's no one in that play side gap and you have a tight shade backside, then you can do a timing step with the backside vertical presence to try to nudge him or pry him to the backside offensive lineman. But as far as the drive reach technique, you're going to be driving through that backside foot at an angle to match the defender's alignment. And what that means is, depending on where that defender's lined up, whether he's a tight shade or a wide technique on the backside shade of the next offensive lineman down the line, you need to adjust the aiming point of that to try to reach him, but at the same time creating force through that backside foot to gain ground off your first step. And then after that first step, you're basically going to be keeping your hips as square as possible while also trying to reach that play side number. And then as far as hand placement and striking, on the initial strike, that backside hand is going to be going through the ribs or the backside part of the breastplate of the defender, and the play side hand is going to be going through the play side number. And then as you, like I said, as those steps develop and you try to reach him, if you don't have him reach by the third steps and can't get your hips around and get to that play side number, you're going to be using the defender's pressure that he's using to go towards that play side gap and just wash him down the line to try to create a cutback lane for the back. And the back's aiming point is going to be somewhere between the play side leg of the guard and the backside leg of the play side tackle. And with that, he's going to be taking his first three steps and just basically seeing where that crease develops. So that first offensive lineman that can get the defender reached is where he is going to basically get 1 foot into the ground and get 90 degrees upfield. Because once that first defender gets reached, it creates a big pile up behind him. Mm-hmm. And as those guys are washing him down, once that they all run into that defender, it creates a crease for the running back to basically, like I said, get his foot in the ground and get upfield right now.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about strike points. You know, this is one of the themes of what we're doing tonight is a strike point. And you have here the backside hand through the backside of the breastplate. When we talk about striking in wide zone, and I'm going to ask the same question I asked with inside zone, right? We talk about wide. We're trying to stretch the field wide. We're trying to move guys horizontally, right, in order to get vertically upfield.
Correct.
Okay. Second thing I have to, we're talking about keeping hips square. I guess I just answered my own question, right? We want to keep our hips square as opposed to inside where we want to try to turn. We want to keep the hips square until we make contact, and then we want to let the guys go. Here it's a little bit different where we're trying to keep the hips square and we're essentially running with our guy, right? Right.
And the whole point of keeping the hip square is so that the guy can't get back across your face. Because if you, on a lot of times with basically with sprint out or with speed option, a lot of the times you're not so much worried about that guy peeling off the backside and chasing down the defender. But with that cutback lane that's trying to be created, if that guy can get backside of you and chase down the back as he makes his one cut up through the hole, that's what you're trying to eliminate with keeping the hip square and that drive reach technique, as opposed to a true open reach and run like we see in sprint out or other concepts like that, where you're not so much worried about that guy spilling backside.
Yeah. I want you to take a step back a little bit. Let's talk about philosophy of wide zone and why teams would run wide zone. If you're a new coach that's tuning into this and they want to learn a little bit more about wide zone, like why teams run it, what would you say is the philosophy behind running wide zone?
So the philosophy behind wide zone, I think for most people that do run it, is to pair with that inside zone. So once you run inside zone, or you can do it as the inverse. But if you start off by running a lot of inside zone, teams are going to start to condense those A gaps and really start to try to fight to put guys into the box. And then with wide zone, it creates, like we said, that crease by hitting it a little bit wider. If you can get that edge, so be it. If not, you're creating that wash and then that crease to cut back up through. But I think wide zone is to stretch the field horizontally and also to counter when teams try to take away the inside zone and bring guys into either a 6-eye or a 4-eye, get that edge, or like we said, if you can't get the edge, then wash guys down and create that crease and create horizontal movement and get linebackers moving side to side, as opposed to filling those A gaps and trying to avoid the inside zone.
Yeah, and I want to get your take on this too. Wide zone, you don't necessarily need to be the 6'4", 6'5" sized line in order to run this, right? I mean, smaller teams could run this and still be successful because you're essentially creating your own running lanes.
Right, and I think if you want to have that philosophy behind wide zone, I think it's one of those concepts where you need to be running it quite a bit every game, to where it's going to be that concept that you hang your hat on. But like I said before, you can have it as a complement to inside zone. There's a lot of things you can do with it, and like you said, it takes away the need for combo blocks and getting that vertical push, and it really plays the advantage of having athletic guys up front. So if you don't have those guys like that, like you said, at the high school level, you don't have 6'2", 6'3" guys that are pushing 300 pounds that can get a consistent vertical push and really dominate the box numbers. It's for you to use the athleticism to your advantage and get guys moving on a horizontal axis as opposed to the vertical axis.
Sure. All right, let's take a little bit of film here, right? So we have a couple clips here, and like I said, I'll slow it down again just so we're able to see it.
Right.
Okay, tell us what we're looking at here. Looking at some more Baylor.
So the first Baylor clip we have here, they do a good job of getting that crease by the play side tackle, the tight end, if you want to. I think it might be, the tight end on the first clip doesn't get that defender reach, so the back cuts it up, as opposed to the second clip where he does get that edge defender reached, so he does hit it more outside to the numbers.
Yep. I'm going to go back to
I think it's a good job of showing the drive reach all the way across, the back getting that 1 foot into the ground and making that decision off of where the crease develops. And then we see the one clip against Odd coming up. It's a good job of that backside shade, or in an odd front where you have a zero technique, where the guard is going to basically overtake that defender by the center as they get a slight combination off the first few steps, and then getting back to that true drive reach by the backside guard.
All right, we're still on the there we go. Okay, now we're looking at the odd front here. So yeah, I can see here at the tight end. Yeah. Okay. So now we're looking at the odd front here.
Right. So with the odd front, it's more of, like I said, that looking at that pass off between the backside guard and the center. And that really applies to any sort of combo with that, as far as having a tight backside shade. So even if the play side guard had a tight, like one or a technique, playing closer to the center, he could lean back if there was no play side defender in that B gap, and nudge them back to the center and work up to the second level. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question that, I see a lot on Twitter, and I know a lot of the coaches. I know from a defensive perspective why it works, but I want to ask you, why does a tight front with a 0 and 2 4-eyes give zone teams so much trouble?
I think, like we talked about with the initial, just as far as having those gaps that are going to be covered with the B gap, and having, in most of those tight fronts, having an overhang defender.
Yep.
I think that is really is getting those angles against those defenders without compromising your true zone integrity. And I think teams do a lot of different stuff to try to counter that with using the H-back, kind of how we talked about last week with the H-back, using his leverage and bringing him across the formation and doing stuff like that to kind of get that angle advantage back. But I think that 4-eye, just as far as having that inside alignment on the tackle and still having outside contained players. So it really gives you a quasi, I guess, bare front look, but without having to put all those guys in the box, which gives teams a lot of trouble.
Yep. That's a good answer. All right, moving on to the gap scheme. Let's talk a little bit about gap.
All right, so with gap scheme, two most common plays out of gap scheme are going to be power and counter. And the only real difference to how they're blocked is as far as the pulling technique for the guard and then possibly a tight end or a backside tackle in that sense. So the gap scheme technique-wise, as far as the down linemen are concerned that aren't going to be pulling, with the play side combo usually between the play side guard and the play side tackle, the inside player, so most likely the guard, is going to be using a timing step to the backside and then a vertical step through the midline, similar to what we talked about with the inside zone on that play side combo. And then the backside player is going to use similar to a drive reach, like we talked about in wide zone, attempting to wash him down the line more so than cut him off. And then those guys are basically going to be responsible for the backside linebacker, but trying to get that vertical presence while also washing him down and kind of walling off that front side for the puller to come around and take out that play side linebacker. And then similar to the drive reach, the alignment dictates the angle of the outside player. So if he's tight to the tackle and more of a 4-eye, that would change his course as opposed to him being a 3 technique or a head up 2 technique. And then if that guy's in the A gap, so in a 2-eye or a 1 technique or a shade or whatever you want to call it, that play side guard is going to be man on with him, just trying to wash him down the line. Unless if he tries to fight back over the top, then it could turn into a double team on the fly. And then that play side tackle is going to come off onto the backside linebacker.
Yeah, and when I stop you just real quick, so when we talk about the play side combo, right? If we do have a 3 technique, and I'm asking this from an introductory standpoint, like I said, assuming a coach has no gap scheme, he's run zone his whole life, he wants to introduce power, wants to introduce counter into his new system.
Right.
Why wouldn't you just block down? Why would you double that 3 technique to the play side as opposed to just like down block and then get the other one to the linebacker? What's the benefit of doubling that play side?
Just getting that vertical movement, like we talked about, similar to that play side combo with a little bit different technique as far as the end point that you're trying to get to, but it's really just to create that double team and get that get more pressure. So if you got 2 guys blocking, you're obviously going to get more movement than most likely just with 1. So I think to try to create space for that puller to pull around to get up through is really the big benefit of creating that double team and getting a vertical movement to the backside linebacker.
Yeah, it also creates a ton of traffic for a linebacker. That's the linebacker's worst nightmare, right? Is when he gets a 3 technique or a 1 technique blown back into his lap because it shuts down the lanes, right? Second thing I want to ask you too is what's the coaching point for let's say we get a double team from the tackle and the guard. What's the coaching point to come off? Like when are you saying to the tackle or to the guard, whoever's releasing off the double team, okay, at this point in time, you can release?
Similar to what we said with the inside zone, you're trying to get that vertical push and put that defender in his lap. Mm-hmm. But if you aren't fortunate enough to get that much movement, let's say you're just washing him down the line, not getting that vertical presence, it's whenever that linebacker declares where he wants to go. So most of the time that backside linebacker, once he sees that pulling guard or a pulling tackle, whatever scheme you're looking to go for, he's going to be a scrape player and try to scrape over the top. So a lot of the times if he does scrape over the top and he goes into the B gap, where the B gap would be the tackle will come off if he tries to go over the top, and that guard will see that and overtake to the play side number of that defender. And if he tries to shoot backside to the play side A gap, then the guard would come off. That's the whole concept of gap scheme, is essentially having responsibilities of the gap rather than of the zone. So when that linebacker declares which gap player he's going to be is when the player responsible for that gap would come off to the linebacker.
Exactly. And that guy getting washed down, it essentially turns into a gap exchange. And if you're getting an over aggressive linebacker too, that double team may last probably a second if he's firing right to the hole. If you're getting a lazy one who takes his time reading it, I mean, that double team could get washed all the way back in his lap, like you just said.
And with that 3 technique, if you do have a guy that's on a blitz course, even if it's that play side linebacker, so most of the times, especially we'll see here in power, which is the scheme that I had from the Baylor clips that I have up here. If that play side linebacker wants to shoot the play side A gap, it's still that play side guard's A gap, so he is responsible for coming off, and then the polar would just exchange and look more to go backside or for a safety coming down to fill that responsibility in the run fit for that B gap. But yes, like I said, as long as you're keeping true to the gap that you're responsible for and making sure that all the gaps are blocked, you should make yourself right on the fly.
Yep. All right, so talk a little bit about the V of the neck and the play side versus with the center. Excuse me.
Right. So the center is going to be blocking back, and the aiming point for the back on this is going to be anywhere between the A gap and the B gap. He's going to be basically following that pulling guard, and wherever that guard adjusts his course to based off of where defensive line moves to post snap is where he is going to get to. So, but regardless, gap scheme is meant to hit play side. So that center is going to be blocking back on a backside 3 technique, 2-eye, whatever the backside defensive tackle is, and an even front. And then versus an odd front, the center and play side guard will be comboing. But talking about strictly against even fronts here, he's going to be blocking back and trying to not allow one for that backside D tackle to get penetration upfield, and 2 for him not to be able to climb back over the top and get into the aiming point for the back. So with that, we have the high block back, and the aiming point for that of the center as far as his head placement. I know coaches are trying to get away from using the head as a landmark, but I think you're basically trying to get your inside screw to the V of his neck is the best way to describe it. I know that, like I said, coaches are trying to get away from using the helmet as a landmark, but I think that's just the best way to do it. And you're not really going helmet to helmet contact per se, just more of the head placement for the center. And by doing that with that step through the midline, but also keeping more of a play side presence, it's 1, going to stop the penetration from the D tackle, and 2, as long as you keep good posture and keep your body to the play side of that defender, he's not going to be able to reach over the top. So as long as you're using good posture, using a good vertical step, and striking through the V of that neck, the defender shouldn't be able to get over top or get too much penetration.
Yeah. And that's the biggest sin, right, of a center, is letting that defense tackle cross face on you. And, being able to pin him to the backside and keep riding him opposite. Because essentially all you got to do is get in his way, right? You got to get in his way and get hands on him and let him ride to the outside, and he's out of the play. The minute he crosses his face or gets to the other side of you, that trouble can happen from that 1 technique or even that 2-eye, like we're seeing here.
Right, for sure. And it's such a quick hitting play that back really doesn't have too much of a read. He's going to be following that guard, but it's not as much of a read as it would be in a zone scheme where it's going to hit A gap to B gap, or wide zone where it can hit from the play side tackle all the way out to the numbers. So with it being that quick hitting of a play, you don't necessarily have to try to stop the penetration that much if he's really one of those guys. And once you get into the game as a center, me playing center in the past, I think once you see, especially at the high school and collegiate level, for the most part, these guys aren't going to be doing that many variety of moves or that many variety of stunts. Once you see where that guy is, if he is an upfield rusher where he is trying to get a lot of penetration, or he's going to sit back there and be more of a read guy where he's going to read your block and then get over the top, you can kind of adjust what you're doing. So if he is one of those upfield players, you can get more of a vertical presence and try to discharge his rush off the ball. Or if he's one of those read guys, you can kind of sit back and more so mirror him and trying to get a little bit of a vertical push, but more so just making sure that you keep good posture and he doesn't do a bull pull or try to get back over the top of that block.
Yeah. All right, cool. Let's take a little bit of film here with gap scheme. So what are we looking at here? We got, like you said, Baylor, the run in, it looks like power.
Yeah, all these clips will be of power. The first one here, we're going to have power to the same size, the running back alignment. We got a good down block there with the double team that guy does rock more so into after the play side tackle collides, and then that linebacker is going to fill hard into that, and he just washes him right down with it. It doesn't hit as a big play, but that's not the goal of every play. If you can average that 6-yard gain every play, you're doing something right. So
yeah, and just how, to your point though, he washes the double team, and that linebacker just gets lost in the mix, right? Essentially,
right.
because he tries to backdoor it, the hole closes up on him, and he runs into the linebacker. Excuse me, the tackle that's washing the 3 technique down. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay,
and then we didn't really talk about it, but that backside alley hinge, that tackle is going to be securing that B gap. Does a good job of it there in that first clip as well.
Yep. That's what we have on screen right now. Yep, backside alley hinge.
Yeah, and then we got that block back by the center. Doesn't really get too much movement, but just enough to where that guy isn't able to make a play over the top.
Yep. Perfect. All right, what's the next clip we're looking at here?
Moving on to that second clip, we get a little bit more of a rock by that defensive line. So they're going to try to get into those B gaps by both the defensive tackles. So in turn, the tackle is going to take him where he wants to go and kind of open up that A gap. So that's where the guard's going to look to hit his course at, is that A gap as opposed to the B gap. As you can see, he kind of turns up quickly. The one backer the play side guard doesn't do the best job of getting a hand on that backside backer, so they scrapes over the top and makes a play. But it's a good job by that tackle of adjusting on the fly to the movement by the defensive line to get a good wider block, and the guard adjusts his course on that pull course.
Yep.
To get skinny through that A gap.
Okay, next clip here. What are we looking at? All
right, this one's against Texas, I believe. On that one, this is probably the best one. It's that same side power. It's a really good job by that backside tackle of securing that B gap. So a lot of times when you see teams that knife those defensive ends inside, you really have to take a violent inside step to really make sure that you're securing that B gap. And if you have a backside 3 technique, it's very hard for that center to get all the way back there in time for that upfield rush. So a lot of times the tackle will have a heavy hand and help that center out until he has to commit to that defensive end. So the tackle does a really good job of that alley hinge, and just a good overall power play there by the offensive line as they hit that pretty big.
Yeah, that H-back does a really good job, too, of digging that defensive end out and getting his shoulders to the inside to create that lane.
Yeah, and running that power out of the same side of the gun, out of that alignment, is a counter the inside zone scheme, because a lot of teams will run inside zone to the backside of with a tight end on the backside in that off alignment. So if you have the ability to run power or counter, whatever your scheme may be, in this case it is power with that same side blocker for the tight end wise, it's a good counter as far as formational tendencies to run that if you're able to, or being able to run it out of the pistol as well, just so you don't have that read key by the defense where you're always going to be running away from the back alignment.
Yeah, and especially if you're getting defensive fronts that are setting opposite the back, because they're expecting zone to come across face. Now essentially you put the H back there and you run same side power or same side zone. It really does throw a wrench in what the defense is trying to do.
And that alignment too is good, because if you're running zone for that, it's a better course for the H or the Y, whatever terminology you want to use for that H back or tight end, to get that backside cut off on the defensive end, and for him to insert and have a good angle to kick that guy out for the power play.
Yeah, I'm just going to run this one more time here. Great. All right, and I believe that's the last slide. Yep. Awesome.
Yeah, that is all I got for that.
No, perfect. Well done. So I just have one question for you, and we'll open up the chat for questions as well. If you're, I'm going back to the same theme of being a new coach and how you would teach this. What would you install first out of those 3 plays? What would be the foundation of what you would lay down as a coach to install first?
Personally, I like the inside zone, but I think you honestly have to look at the personnel that you have and match as far as what you're going to do offensively and what you're going to hang your hat on. You have to be a good enough coach to be able to adjust to what you have personnel wise. So if you have a team that is going to be more of a finesse athletic up front, you might not be as much of an inside zone, but it also is a good way for teams that are smaller to create double teams and get vertical movement while creating those double teams. So I think you just have to look at personnel, but personally, I do love Ohio State's tight zone that they would run there and that I ran in college. It's honestly my favorite run play. But I'm also a big fan of, like I said, pairing that with gap scheme as well. But those are my three favorite as far as overall scheme wise. So I would install all three of them. But if I was going for a day one install, what you're going to hang your hat on, I would install inside zone, and then off of that, put in wide zone as a complement to it, and then establish a nice gap scheme as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned gap scheme, right? So you can essentially, install power, and then you talked a little bit about counter. I want you to elaborate a little bit more on counter. Like I said, for new coaches that don't necessarily know what counter is, and we talk about gap in the front side, and then what are we doing with the back side?
Right. So you still have that same gap scheme principles for the front side. And then with counter, you are able to so with power, that back does have the ability, if the backside defensive tackle does really want to fight over the top, it's easier for him with that backside alley hinge by the tackle to be able to have a cutback and have that play still be semi-successful. But with counter, when you got with counter as opposed to power, the front side, the tight end most likely is going to be aligned on that front side, being responsible for that play side defensive end, and the backside guard is going to be pulling to lead through for the play side linebacker, as opposed to with counter, the backside guard is going to be open pulling or trap pulling to kick out that defensive end. So him and the tight end really sort of exchange responsibilities in the counter scheme. So he's going to be kicking out the defensive end, either a backside tackle or an H-back, or if you want to run Q counter, some teams will do it with a tailback, but there's a second player, in essence, leading through with that backside guard kicking out.
Yeah, and I want to ask you this question too from a defensive standpoint. I know a lot of teams that will either wrong arm or they'll slide to the inside to disrupt that first kickout block. As an offensive line coach, what would you teach your guys when introducing the counter play as far as digging that guy out and getting that initial kickout block?
I think when you have there's two things you can do when teams are trying to wrong arm and really spill that really hard. One, if you're going to still stay true to that kick out block, you have to make sure that your initial footwork and your initial pull course is trying to get as tight to the line of scrimmage, or as it was a good term that my college offensive line coach had, was the line of defecation. So get as close to the butts of the developing play. So even off of the initial snap, it's not good enough to just get down the line of scrimmage. You need to be as tight to adjust to that combo block to where they move, to get as far upfield as possible so you can try to dig him out. And then off of split zone, off of counter, off of that sort of philosophy, you can do stuff where you have an evade course and you read that guy. So then you get an extra blocker out in space for the QB to pull. So there's a couple different things you can do, but if you're going to stay true to that course, it's really getting as tight to the line as possible and just digging him out, getting the head upfield in your inside hand, or the outside hand on the inside number, and really just trying to dig him out as much as possible, and just not allow him to disrupt your course to where it's going to disrupt the second puller who's trying to get up and lead through.
Yep. That's a great point. I'm seeing no questions come through, so we're going to wrap there. Do you have any final comments that you want to, put out there as far as attack points or hand placement? I know the line of defecation, that's the first time I've actually heard that. And I actually really like that too. Just staying tight along that line of scrimmage, because the first pull step is crucial, right? You're too deep. Right. You're not going to get the angle to kick them out. If you get too far into the line, then, you're just going to end up running into somebody. So I think from a teaching standpoint, people are visual learners, right? So that's one way to learn visually, is to create that line of defecation. So any last words?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good tape out there that you can watch of teams. Chip Kelly is a good guy for the inside zone, wide zone, pairing wise. There's a lot of good stuff that teams are doing with that sense. There is a lot of good tape out there. So many teams are running it at the college level. If you can get your hands on tape, it's a great way to learn about it. That Baylor tape, I have so many cut-ups of Baylor that I have shared. So if anyone ever wants anything, feel free to reach out if you have any more questions about anything like that. I'm more than happy to talk about inside zone, wide zone, power, counter, whatever you want to talk about anytime.
Yeah. Awesome. We just got a nice compliment here from Loganville saying, he said, great explanations. Thanks, coach. So thanks again for tuning in. I'm Chris Haddad, Coach Swingle, Coach_Swingle, the Victory team here. We have Coach John Weaver coming on next week to talk about quick game and creating an identity for your position group. So make sure to tune in next week at 8 p.m. We're going to be live again on Tuesday, every Tuesday for the off season. Big shout out to our sponsor, Team Builder, and what they do and all the support they give us as well. So we will see you guys next week.